When people think about going to church, they often think about what they can get out of it. Things like good sermons or great music and worship, maybe a great program for their kids, or even just friendship and community. But what if that wasn't the purpose of church? What if it was meant to be so much more? Well, in this video, we're going to dive deep into the idea of going to church, why that should matter, and what should we expect when we go to church. I'm so glad that you're here today on Whiskey and the Writings. This is a place for the skeptic, the seeker, those who are spiritually curious, still believe, but maybe just not like they used to. A place where you can ask questions and wrestle with your faith honestly. My name is Joe, and over the past 2 decades, I've been working in churches. I have a master's degree in biblical theology, and if you have questions, I'm glad you're here because you're in the right place. Let's get started. Okay, so we're talking about going to church and what it looks like and the expectations you should have when you go to church. Because the issue is that oftentimes our Western churches have built themselves around accommodation. They're more concerned with getting you there and keeping you there. And the getting you there is about really just this idea oftentimes of what interests do you have. If you're a family person, you've got kids, right? An important decision for you to make is, will they take care of my kids? Do they have a program to help my kids learn and grow? If you're not at that stage, maybe your interests are in the style of music or how cool the place looks, or the preacher himself. Is he entertaining? Does he keep you engaged? Does he go too deep, or is he applicable to your daily lives when he talks and teaches? And so there's all of these criteria that people use when deciding what church to go to. And this has become increasingly something I've been working through and my friends have been working through as we've recently, my wife and I transitioned out of working in a church. I was working at a church for the past 5 years, 4.5 years, and have stepped out of that role. And so we find ourselves in a place where we're looking for, what does it look like for us to plug back into a church? And what are the criteria that we have in making those decisions? My kids have also been in a season of looking for a church, friends of ours in seasons of looking for a church. And so there's kind of two people groups here that I think I want to talk to in this video. The first one are those who are still spiritually curious. You've maybe experienced a lot in churches that have caused you to want to step away, but you're not ready to give up on it just yet. You still believe, but maybe just not like you used to believe. And so you're looking for an environment to help you take a next step in your faith. Maybe you've left your church because it no longer is a place that's pushing you forward to grow and to learn, or you've learned new things that maybe aren't okay with the church you're at. So you have to find a new place to worship because you don't feel like you belong anymore. There are those people I want to talk to. And then there are others that have a label that's been placed on them, culturally speaking, from a church perspective. And that's called the de-churched. De-churched are people who have experienced something that has caused them to pull away. It could be a theological thing, but oftentimes it's not simply theologically based. It's more of a hurt or a pain that they've experienced at the hands of church leadership. And so they have stepped away from church, no longer believing that that's a safe place for them. And they're not interested anymore in going back to church. And so those are people that could be called de-church. They're out of a church and they're not looking for a church to re-engage with. And so there's two kinds of people that I want to talk to, because the first group, you're looking. And so maybe I want to give some thoughts and ideas regarding that. The other group, you're not looking. And maybe I want to challenge you that maybe it's time to actually consider it again. And so that's what we're going to look at today in our video. And before we dive into the writings and look at what the Bible has to offer on this conversation, we're actually going to dive into some whiskey. So let's get started. All right, for our whiskey today, I'm bringing back my favorite. This there's a reason why I'm bringing this back. This is Early Times. This is a bottled and bond, 100 proof, full liter whiskey that is absolutely delicious and worth picking up if you find it on your shelf. It went away for a little while in Idaho, and then it recently came back. But this Early Times is surprising for a couple of reasons. One, it's just a really good, easy drink whiskey. It's got tons of flavor, a little bit on the sweet side. So if you like a little sweeter flavor in your whiskey, this is going to be a great option. It's super affordable. I mean, this is going to be under $40. I mean, in some cases, I think like $28, $27. So it's super affordable. It comes in a liter, a full liter, so you're getting more whiskey, more bang for your buck. And cool thing, it recently is been awarded the best bottle in bond in this year's whiskey awards and competition. So it's now an award-winning bottle and bond whiskey, and I love it because I've been drinking this for a couple of years now. So I feel like I'm a little bit on the insider track of whiskey because I've been drinking this for a while, and it recently just won the award for best bottle in bond. So pick it up because I think it's going to hit the market, but it might actually increase in price, which will be sad if that's the case. Just because you win an award, more people are going to buy it. Thus, you might charge more for it. Hopefully that doesn't happen, but so I'm bringing it back because I just read that and I thought that was awesome. Early Times Bottled and Bond is what we're drinking today. Whatever you have in front of you, pour your glass, take a sip, drink responsibly. Let's dive in. Okay, for our writings portion, we're going to look at two texts. One is going to be a biblical source, and the other is not going to be a biblical source, but I think we'll learn something nonetheless. So we're first going to look at in the Bible, there's a writing called Hebrews, and this is towards the back of your New Testament. And Hebrews is an interesting writing for a number of reasons. One, we don't know who the author is. And so there is some speculation as to who this author might be. There's some that say could have been Paul, although the way that it's written, other scholars kind of say maybe not, because it doesn't fit thematically and stylistically the way that Paul writes, or what we know is genuine Pauline letters. It doesn't really match. So although some have proposed that, it most likely is probably not. Others have proposed maybe a Peter authorship, maybe even a James authorship, but we really don't know. And one fascinating thing that I think I've read in scholarship, and again, this is just hypothetical, we just don't know who wrote it, but there have even some scholars that have proposed it could have been a female disciple. We're not going to get into all the nitty gritty of it, but how interesting would it have been if this was written by a female follower of Jesus? All that to say, this is a beautiful, beautiful writing that you could spend forever unpacking and unloading and learning through. Today, we're going to look at a particular verse that's shared towards the end of this writing. And so this is going to be in chapter 10. And in chapter 10, we get this kind of encouragement towards communal living. And this would have been very important for Jewish people that lived and grew in communities around synagogue in their region and area. And so it makes sense that this would be an encouragement to continue in that communal living instead of pulling away from it. And in verse 24 of chapter 10, we get this encouragement. It says this, "And let us take thought of how to spur one another on to love and good works, not abandoning our own meetings as in some are in the habit of doing, but encouraging each other, and even more so because you see the day drawing near." So we have this encouragement that the writer, whoever it is trying to help them recognize that when you come together, we should be considering on how to push each other forward, encouraging one another, and helping each other grow towards love and good works, the writer says, and not abandon the coming together of people. And it's interesting that the writer references as some are in the habit of doing. I wonder what was happening in this early community that was causing people to be de-churched. What issues were arising that caused people to pull away? It's lost on us the reality of that situation. But I often wonder, as this early faith community called Christians were emerging and defining their rhythms and patterns of church, there was probably a lot of dysfunction that took place. We know this to be true when you simply read Paul's letters, right? We have Paul's letters because in most cases, he's trying to correct bad practice in these early communities. And so that itself is evident that there were problems in these communities. And I wonder if some people that were trying to experience and live out this Christian kingdom way of living just got fed up and said, you know what, I'm out. And they just move on and they leave these communities. I wonder if these de-churched people, if that's what we can call them, left with genuine frustration about the condition they saw the church in. People that were abusing the way of Jesus in their community, and they just said, that's it, I'm done. And so when we think of people who are de-churched, and we, those in Christian communities and church leaders often, you know, almost villainize de-churched people, like there's something wrong with them. When oftentimes I think people that pull themselves out of these communities are pulling themselves out of these communities for valid reasons. And I wonder if that's what's happening here. Now, the encouragement is that they don't do that. That there is a value in sticking with it and not pulling away from the community and just saying, I'm out. But the thing that we should see here is that very early on, okay, so this is a writing that might, like, mid to late first century, let's just throw it to late century, give it a late dating. This was an encouragement early on in these communities of Jesus followers that they be the kinds of people that come together. And so, through that lens, we see the church beginning to be built and organize itself into formal gatherings by which they practice their faith. And I want to share with you, we're going to move on from the Bible text, and we're going to move on to a different text, because I want to share with you a resource that I read years ago and just opened my eyes to what it might have been like for these early church communities. And the source is a man named Justin Martyr. Justin Martyr was an early church leader that lived in the late first century. So this is a person who was a second generation Christian. And this Christian was experiencing difficulties in the life of being a Christian at this time in a Roman Empire. You see, in the early centuries of Christianity, it was a very volatile place. The world did not look at these new Christians favorably. The Roman Empire didn't. And it's not that there was this, in the early years, it's not that there was this like universal attack on the church. There were moments of it, like the Emperor Julian in the late third century. There were moments, Diocletian, where there was severe persecution of the church. But for the first 300 years, at least I would say this, for the first 100 years, Christianity was an oddity. It was a weird thing to be a part of. There are early sources in Roman writings that talk about these early Christians and how weird they were. Christians were accused of being atheists because they rejected the Roman pantheon, the Greco Roman pantheon of gods. They were called atheists. That's interesting to think of. They were called cannibals because they would hear rumors about what we call today communion, the bread and blood of Jesus, this teaching of Eucharist that churches partake in. And they would hear these teachings of eating flesh and drinking blood, and they thought these early Christians were cannibals. They thought they were literally doing it. The early Christian gatherings were called love feasts. This term, love feasts, were about a gathering of people that eat together, that share a meal together in common love and unity. Well, when the early, first century Roman citizens heard of these love feasts, they thought they were these big orgies that were taking place. And so it's interesting that the earliest views of Christianity was like, what is this thing? They were viewed as a disruption. They were viewed as antisocial. They were viewed as, like I said, atheists and cannibals. And so you have these weird ideas. And it's true when a culture or a people group other and thinks someone else is odd or weird, oftentimes that leads to a abuse that takes place, or something that when a people group are feared or thought of as weird, they oftentimes get persecuted in various ways, and we even see this today. And so this guy, Justin Martyr, he's trying to help people see the truth of what they're doing as Christians. And so Justin Martyr writes a work called his first apology. And that term seems weird to us, but it's the first apology. The word apology is this idea of apologetics. It means to defend. First defense. It's not, hey, I'm so sorry, apology. That's not what the word means in this context. It's a first apologetics, or a first defense. And so Justin Martyr's trying to defend this thing called Christianity. Okay, so I set all of that up. It's fascinating. You should read it. Later on in his writing, his first defense, his first apology, this dates to around the 150s AD, maybe 160. So you're talking about just the turn of the century, maybe 100 years after Jesus's resurrection. So what's fascinating about this is that we get in this writing the earliest depiction of what a church service would have looked like at that time. So let me say that again. In Justin Martyr's first apology or first defense, he outlines what a church service looks like at that time. This is the earliest writing of a depiction of a church that we have in antiquity. It's absolutely fascinating that we even have this. And he's writing this to the Roman emperor so that the emperor would maybe hopefully stop all the persecution or the bad blood that they've gotten from all the neighbors and in the towns and regions that they're at. And so he writes this, and I want to read it to you, and then we're going to look at it a little bit more in detail. So this is what he says in his writing, his first apology, about church services. Now remember, he's trying to explain to the emperor what's going on with Christianity. Like, what are these meetings all about? Because it's not like today where you could just walk off the street and jump into one of these meetings. You needed to be invited into these meetings, okay? It's not like how church services are today. And so these were private meetings in people's private homes. And so it's not like you're going to an open air forum like a synagogue in the ancient world or a temple in the ancient world. Christians met in homes, and so you just wouldn't walk into someone's home to go, "Oh, what's going on here?" Right? You would have been invited in, and so there was a lot of like confusion. It's like, what are these people doing? I hear about these Christians, but I've never seen one of their services. I've never been a part of it because you haven't been invited to it, right? So this is the motivation of Justin Martyr to write what he's writing. He's trying to explain, hey guys, this isn't a big secret. Like this, here's what we're doing. Okay, that's my setup. And that was a long setup, but this is fascinating. Listen to what he says. I'm reading it here from my laptop. He says, and on the day called Sunday, all who live in cities or in the country gather together to one place, and the memoirs of the apostles or the writings of the prophets are read as long as time permits. Okay, full stop. All right, we're going to go on, but full stop for a second. The memoirs of the apostles, or the memoirs of, the memoirs of the apostles are most likely the gospels. Okay, so a church community might have had one, man, if they were lucky or large, might have had two copies of a gospel, and they would read these things out loud because, again, this might be the first time someone even hears the teachings of Jesus through these gospels. And so they read them, or they read the prophets, which would have been Old Testament, what we call Old Testament writings. And so, Isaiah, Ezekiel, so on and so forth. So, and it's interesting, he says they read them as long as time permits. Okay. Can you imagine attending a church service today where all that they do is read a gospel until like as long as time permits? Like, what does that even mean? Is that an hour? Is that a half hour? Is it until people get bored? Is it till they run out of light? I mean, all these things. It's hilarious to think, what would that be like if you go to a church today and instead of a big light show and fancy music and big LED walls, you just had someone stand up and just start reading the text? I think that would be awesome, personally. But hey, then he goes on to say, then when the reader has ceased, the president verbally instructs. That would have been like the bishop, the person that was overseeing that community. Okay, because they appointed bishops, elders, presbyters, shepherds, pastors. The terms there kind of fluctuate and what they would have been called, but we'll just stick with bishop or maybe even pastor, would verbally instruct and exhort to the imitation of these good things. So then they would read as long as time permits, and then a minister, a bishop, the person that's overseeing that community would stand up and encourage the people in accordance to what they just read. A little bit maybe like an expository sermon, like, hey, here's the text, here's what it means, and here's how we should live it out, right? So not unlike what we see today. Then it says, then we all rise together and pray. And as we before said, when our prayer is ended, bread and wine and water are brought, and the president, bishop, in like manner offers prayers and thanksgivings according to his ability, and the people assent, saying, Amen. And there is distribution to each and participation of that over which thanks have been given, and those who are absent in portion is sent by the deacons. And so they do communion together. Okay, so you have read the text as long as time permits. The bishop, the leader, whatever, gets up and encourages the people in regards to what they just read, and then they take communion together. Bread and wine are brought out and they all participate. There's a prayer over it and everybody says amen, and they participate. And then the deacons, these are church workers, people who are assigned roles of supporting the community. Maybe they're not the bishop, but they're in charge of helping do the work of the ministry. Those people who are absent, who couldn't come, they take that bread and wine to them. They make sure that they participate in it too. It was an important, integral part of the church community, was to participate in communion. And then he goes on to say, and they who are well to do and willing give what each thinks fit, and what is collected is deposited with the president, the bishop, who secures who takes care of the orphans and the widows and those who, through sickness or any other cause, are in want. and those who are in bonds, and the strangers journeying among us, and in a word takes care of all those who are in need. So, okay, you're following with me. We've got the reading of the text, then you've got the encouragement towards the text, then you've got communion, and then they take up an offering. And this is interesting. There's no mention of 10%. There's no mention of like tithe, right? It's simply this offering of supporting the community. So it says, whoever has the ability to do so gives what they think is fit. So something's happening, determining in their own heart. A little bit what Paul said, to determine in your own heart what you can give. And when they give, the president or the bishop, the leader of the church, doesn't build a new building with it. He doesn't pay his staff with it. He doesn't get a new, smoke machine for the auditorium. I'm being sarcastic here. He says they use those funds to take care of those who are in need. Not a percentage of the funds, all of the funds. The bishop's role, the president's role, was to take that which was given and then look for those who are in want in their community and help support them. Imagine for a second a church that came together every week, read the scriptures together. Then you have someone who maybe has studied and knows a little bit more about what's going on, encourages everyone in regards to it. And then they take communion together. And then they take an offering. And the person that's leading that in that church looks at what's given and distributes it among those who are in need and want. Wow. What an incredible concept. So then he wraps it up with this. But Sunday is the day on which we all hold our common assembly, because it is the first day on which God, having wrought a change in darkness and matter, made world, and Jesus Christ our Savior on the same day rose from the dead. And so he ends this writing by saying, and the reason we meet on Sundays is because that's how we recognize the resurrection of Jesus. What's fascinating about this, in addition to it being the earliest source we have of a church service, is this detail of what church services were like. He's trying to help people understand we're not doing anything crazy here. And so what does that mean for us in church today? And how can we walk away from something like this and think about what we should get out of church today? Well, for that, we're going to look at I'm Just Saying. Let's jump into that. Okay, for the I'm Just Saying, we're going to talk about a couple things here. So we just got done going into a big deep dive about Justin Martyr, much more than maybe you're interested in, but hopefully you found it interesting enough to stick around to this point. So we're looking at two different ideas here. One, if you are looking for a church. And so as I've been in this state, there are some criterias that I have when I think of church, and it has nothing to do with what programs are available, how great the music is, and how great the speaker is. Has to do with a couple things. So as we saw in the writing to Hebrews, in the writings portion, the encouragement is that we should come together. And I agree with that, in that you can't do Christianity alone. We've talked about this before in the video of can I still be a Christian and not go to church? The idea here is that Christianity has always been and will always be communal. It's a communal religion. It's all about people working together, living together in God's kingdom and God's way. And so the writer of Hebrews is trying to encourage us to say we need to keep meeting together. And I agree with that. So the issue for me has never been, well, I'm out of church because I'm frustrated with it. The question for me is, what reform do we need to see in church, and how can we encourage churches to be more about what Jesus was about and less about what the world and the culture looks like. And so for me, there's some criteria here. Things like what we see in Justin Martyr. How valued is scripture reading? And not simply just the writings of Paul, which a lot of Protestant churches seem to think more highly of Paul maybe than of Jesus, just by the priority that they put on Paul and his writings over Jesus and what he said. That's a whole other debate we could talk about later. But my point is like, how much do you hear the words of Jesus? Is it when you walk into the place, how much of the text takes up the portion of the service? I've been to churches where you have one verse and then it's all teaching. You don't know what's happening before the verse. You don't know what's happening after the verse. It's just all like this expository type, TED talk. So for me, it's how much is the text utilized in the service. But that's not to say that I'm opposed to preachers either. Being someone who has preached, I mean, for 2 decades, I've been teaching and preaching, and so I understand like there's a value in that. And the earliest church services had that, where someone would get up and read it. But what I find is interesting is what's the ratio to that, right? Is it all pastor teaching? Is it all scripture? And for me, I prefer to have maybe more scripture heavy than TED Talk heavy. So that's what I'm looking for. The other thing is how valued are the sacraments. And when I say sacraments, we're talking about two major sacraments that I look at. I know that in Catholicism there is 7 sacraments, I believe, maybe more. But in the Protestant movement, the two primary sacraments are Eucharist or communion and baptism. And so what role do those two things play in that community? And so I find a high value in communion because it was instituted by Jesus himself to encourage us to do it often, because it roots us and centers us into the body and the blood representing the life of Jesus, his death and resurrection. And so those things seem to root us into Christianity, historical Christianity. So I think those things are valuable. What role do those sacraments play in the church you're looking at? And then thirdly, and this is a big one for my wife and I. How is that church utilizing its resources? And resources come in various ways: people, money, time, right? And so when I look at a church, where are they using their resources? Now, I've been at churches and I've worked at churches where you have budgets. Okay, it's smart. It's not a bad thing. Every church, when you're bringing in money, probably has a budget, and every year they review that budget. I mean, listen, if you're at a church and like you don't know how they're spending their money and they keep that secret from you, that's probably problematic. But I'll say this: every church every year reviews their budget. Every church I've worked at did that, where they look at, here are the resources coming in, how are we going to allocate it, right? And if you have a church that has multiple people on staff, I would bet you that resource of finances, like that budget, is probably 50% of what the annual budget is for that church. Uh, if that church has a huge building, fancy decor, big LED walls, things like that, that stuff ain't cheap, y'all. And so I bet you if that church doesn't own that property outright, that the resources are dwindling down. You see it? So think about it. If you have 100% of your resources coming in and you've got, let's just be generous. A quarter of that is to staff. But if they have a building, I bet you like 50% of that is going to building and maintenance and those sorts of things. And so now you're down to a quarter of your overall budget that you're actually reinvesting in different ways. And then if that community has big programs in the church, then that's a percentage. Maybe 10% goes to those programs. If that community has missions that they prioritize, then maybe 5% goes to the missions. You see what I'm saying? It dwindles down. But that's not how the earliest church worked. It wasn't about them. It was about helping others. And so the question you got to ask yourself when you're looking for a church, is this about me? Is this church been organized and built around my needs? or the needs of others? Let me pause and let you think about that one for a sec. If your church is built around prioritizing your comfort, is it really a church that Jesus would go to? I've seen it over and over again. We got to have a better kids program because families are coming to our church and we got to take care of their kids. They have lots of youth, and so we got to start up a youth program because we got to entertain, keep these kids coming back. Those things aren't bad. They're not inherently bad. But the undercurrent of that mentality is that the church now is being focused and centered on your comfort. The worship, is it the music good? Are the musicians talented? What does it sound like? Can they stay in pitch and all these things, right? The decor, is it modern? Is it aesthetically pleasing? Is it something that someone would want to come into? All of these things aren't bad things, but the undercurrent, you picking this up, the undercurrent is that it's about you. And the earliest church wasn't about them. They came together to learn about Jesus. They participated in the elements of Eucharist and baptism so that they could ground themselves in the teachings of Jesus. And then they took care of those around them. And so those are the three things that I look for when I go to a church. And I would encourage you that if you're in a church and you're comfortable, maybe we should question that. Should I be comfortable in church? Should all my needs be taken care of in church? If I'm good, I've got a good job, I've got a house, I've got a vehicle, I've got, healthy kids, I'm taken care of, and your church isn't prioritizing those who are in need, man, is that a church that Jesus would go to? All right, so that's an encouragement to you. If you're looking for a church, I'd encourage you to find one, prioritizes the text, grounds itself in the sacraments, and is about taking care of other people. Okay, those things. Now, if you're de-churched, you're someone who's like, I've given up on church altogether. I want to encourage you with this, and this will be simply, right? When we say never judge Jesus by the abuse done in his name, something we say a lot on Whiskey in the Writings. Maybe I can twist that a little bit to say this. Don't judge church because of the abuse done by the church. Not all churches are the same. And if you're at a very traditional church that has a pastor that acts like a CEO, that makes you comfortable when you come in so that you don't want to leave, it's almost like taking a sedative, right? It's almost like churches today want to dumb you down instead of release in you what God is doing in you. I want to encourage you with this. There are churches that are trying to buck this system. The problem is in American churches, we've created ruts of being comfortable. Everything's about your comfort in America. And the way of Jesus is not about your comfort. And so there are churches that are saying we've got to try it different. And it's really, really hard to do. My wife and I pastored a church called The Gathering for 10 years. I was bivocational, which means I had a full-time job and I pastored this church. And it was easily the most beautiful community I've ever been a part of. And we are dear, dear friends with people from that community still today. And I'll tell you what, there are times I even wonder, like, gosh, dang it, I miss doing that with them. That's not to say if you're listening to this and you were a part of that, oh, is Joe going to do that again? No, the pastor game, I'm done with that. But we were trying to do something different in our services. And we had, our values were thinking, faith, and authentic community. And we talked about you don't have to turn your brain off when you go to church, right? I challenged people to think, and kind of what these videos are all about that we do here at Whiskey and the Writings is just to go like, let's think through what we're doing in authentic community, just being ourselves, fully transparent where we're at. And, we didn't do everything right, but it was a beautiful space. And there are churches out there that are trying to buck the system like we were trying to do in the mid 2000s. And it was really hard to do in an environment like Boise, Idaho, where I'm from, where, everything is about this kind of non-denom, big show, high evangelicalism culture and climate. All that to say, if you've been de-churched and you've walked away from church saying this isn't for me, maybe they've hurt you, maybe you just go, man, I'm over the hypocrisy and it just doesn't make sense for me. Maybe you're like those who were written about in the writing of Hebrews, where they just stopped going to church. They're just like, you know what, I'm done with it. Can I just encourage you with this? There are churches out there that are trying to do it well. And if you want help and encouragement in finding a place, I'd be more than happy to do some research with you. You can reach out to us at whiskeyinthewritings at gmail.com. It's our website, or I mean, our email address. Reach out to me, contact me, leave a comment. I'll connect with you. And together, maybe we can find something that helps you take a next step. You can share your story with me, and we can find a place for you. But the answer is not, I don't need the church. The answer is, how do I plug myself into a church that's not about me in order to help Jesus' community grow and his kingdom advance? So that's the I'm just saying. So, folks, that is going to do it for today. I'm not going to do a comment on your comments because we've gone too long already. But thank you for watching. Thank you for being a part of this channel. And if you haven't liked us yet, or liked the video or whatever, subscribe. All that stuff kind of just helps us grow and reach new people. If this has been a helpful video to you, share it with someone. Let people know about it. But I'm just glad you're hanging out and listening. And so if you've made it this far, thank you, thank you, thank you for being a part of Whiskey in the Writing. So that's all we have for today. And yeah, I appreciate y'all. Cheers.